So, From Software just came up with a clever solution to a kind of niche problem. Ever since Dark Souls 2, there have been systems in these games that were added to make it easier to pair with specific friends. First we had the name engraved ring, then after that we've had more straightforward password matchmaking systems since Bloodborne. But there's always been this sort of lingering question. Why can't we just try to get the community to agree on a password? Something that everyone turns on by default. Well, this actually turned out to be a really bad idea. So today I'd like to talk about why that didn't work in previous Souls games, and how Elden Ring finally figured out a pretty good solution for it. But before we get started, I wanted to set some expectations for my early videos here. I actually don't have a capture card set up for my PlayStation, and I wasn't planning on making videos about Elden Ring right away. I sort of assumed that I wouldn't have much to add to the discussion, as the sort of deep dives I like to do about weird game mechanics usually take more time. But I was able to participate in all but one of the network tests, and now I realize I'd like to share my findings so far. So most of what you'll see on screen is borrowed footage that isn't going to visually match what I'm talking about most of the time. I'll throw in some relevant footage where I can find it, and also some off-screen cell phone pictures and clips I recorded, but for the most part you can treat this more like a video podcast, rather than being some carefully constructed presentation that I usually try to make. A huge thanks to everyone who lent me footage, and you'll find their credits both on screen and links to their channels in the video description below. So, why would you want to coordinate a massively shared password in the first place? Well, there are essentially two lines of reasoning. The first is that passwords help expand or make level ranges unlimited for co-op, so you can hypothetically play through the game at any level you'd like, and no longer have to worry about meta level ranges. The second is that it would be just kind of neat to pair with other members of your community. Knowing that a summon sign you find belongs to someone from the same forum, or Discord, or wiki community, that would be pretty cool. It could add a social element to these games where it's easier to talk about the random encounters you have online, and actually have that discussion find its way back to the involved players. Though as I mentioned earlier, this didn't really work. No matter how hard you tried to get everyone to share the same password, there was a sort of inevitable and rapid decay to its use. What would happen is that a lot of people would try using it, and it might work okay for like a day or two, but then you'd run into a situation where it's taking longer than normal to find a summon sign. You're waiting and waiting until you remember that the password is blocking you from seeing signs from people who aren't using the same password. So then you turn it off, and this helps you find more signs faster, and then it's game over from there. Sure, from here you might try turning the password on and off every now and again, but the end result was finding less and less summon signs with the password turned on. The attempts at bringing a community together and making it easier to find signs by bypassing level ranges, that always backfired, and it always resulted in a more lonely experience than if the password was simply turned off. I have a lot of examples I could point to, like I remember how the Bloodborne subreddit tried setting a community password of Panacea. But I'd like to stress how it even failed in what I would consider to be the best case scenario. You might be thinking, what about specific events? Sure, maybe it's a bad idea to try and force a community password for an indefinite period of time, but what if you planned an event where you just told everyone involved to do it? Well, I did exactly that. You might be familiar with the Return to X series of events, but if you're not, the older Souls games typically have annual events where the community tries to get large numbers of players to replay the games at the same time. I actually organized the first Return to Drangleic for Dark Souls 2, and here's the flyer we put out for it. You can see how the third bullet tells you to use the name engraved ring and which god to choose. Going into this event, I already knew it might be a bad idea, but there was so much debate about community passwords before this, and even as someone who is skeptical about them, I thought that I should at least try, in earnest, to see what would happen. I knew this would be a best case scenario for the concept, and it started off pretty great. We got a lot of summon signs in early game areas, and there was a legitimate surge of activity where the game appeared to have a lot more activity than normal. But the inevitable decay that I talked about earlier, that took less than 24 hours. Only one day into the event, taking the ring off was significantly better than keeping it on. And you can see what happened with next year's event. We got rid of it because it was a massive failure. I mean, the event overall still went very well, but that was in spite of the difficulties caused by splitting the player base. This is admittedly a pretty niche problem that the vast majority of players aren't worried about, and I wasn't expecting From Software to introduce any new mechanics in response to this. But a solution was created for Elden Ring, and I'm excited to talk about what this means for communities and events moving forward. They've now added what is called Group Password. I'm kind of used to there being some inscrutable stuff in their menus, so at first glance I thought, two different passwords, what's up with that? But then I actually stopped to read about it, and it promised something pretty cool. It said that summon signs, messages, bloodstains, and ghosts will appear differently for anyone with a matching group password, and that it should also be easier to find those random online elements. So for everyone who wanted to set a community password in the past, this is it. What you can do is set a group password without creating a regular password. By leaving the first password slot blank, you're not filtering out the general player base. You can still summon and be summoned by random players, but you can be on the lookout for special summon signs that indicate they're from your community. Here we can see a summon sign on the left that's from within my community, and one towards the right that isn't. This is really cool. And I also like how it goes one step further and applies to more than just the matchmaking itself. Even with a regular password set in these games, that never filtered out things like messages and bloodstains. But now you'll be able to pick those out from the crowd as well. What they did is they've added a sort of rune-like circle of text that surrounds all of these online elements. Messages and bloodstains also receive these, and it makes them stand out. Their sort of aura becomes a little more prominent as well. You get those vertical lines that rise above these things, and you can see how they're taller here. Random player ghosts even appear a little differently. It's pretty subtle though, and it would be nice if the effect was a bit stronger for them, but random online players appear completely white, while ghosts from your community have a slight golden tinge to them. Here we can see my friend Ronin attacking this fog wall, contrasted to another random player running around in the background shortly after, who is more white. Also recorded a second clip that shows it a bit better. We can see the group phantom color from this message gesture here, as a regular random ghost runs by. I can see this having some silly outcomes on a small scale. Like if you've ever seen a bloodstain animation that you found to be really funny, now if it's from your community, I could easily see someone posting a thread saying, okay, who died here? Or, like, what the hell happened? And the chances of someone relevant seeing it now are quite a bit higher. I think I can also vouch for the promise of making it easier to find these random online elements. Things like player ghosts are usually on something like a 15-second or 30-second delay, and I think the games have had a way of recycling ones that are a bit older in the past, but with the group password enabled, after loading up different characters and moving on to other parts of the game, we eventually came back to some places we were earlier, and Ronin and I saw each other's much older ghosts from the same group password. Maybe regular ghosts and bloodstains get recycled just as much, but I had a strong suspicion that the password was responsible, like it might be making a greater effort to pull in older stuff from our group. I can also see this being relevant for things like fight clubs. Sometimes fight clubs like to set specific rules when they can. Maybe a certain overpowered weapon art or spell will be frowned upon, or maybe they'll actually want to use certain glitches, in which case whoever is hosting might choose to only summon from signs that have that extra rune on them. It can be a shorthand way for a Twitch streamer to look at a summon sign and reasonably assume that that person knows the rules of the event. At the end of the day, is this a really important game-changing feature? Not really, and I suspect the majority of players probably aren't going to mess with group passwords or care about them. Like I said, it was kind of a niche problem in the first place, but I also know there are going to be some people who really dig it, and I'm thankful it's there for us. Now Reddit, or Fextralife, or whatever your Discord community is, they can actually do this without shooting themselves in the foot. I can see a Return to the Lands Between event a bunch of years down the road, setting a password of something like returned without any fuss. People have been wanting something like this for years, but I don't think anyone ever really envisioned a specific solution for it. So this feels pretty out of left field, in a good way. But there are a couple unanswered questions I have about it. I don't yet know if it bypasses the standard co-op level ranges for players in your group as well. It would be seriously cool if it does include that same benefit that the normal passwords have. So I'll be keeping my fingers crossed on that, but even if it doesn't, I'll still be pretty happy with it. I also don't know if it makes actual player phantoms appear a bit differently. I didn't think to do a side-by-side comparison in time, and given how subtle the player ghosts appeared differently, it wouldn't surprise me if I simply overlooked it. Where I think this would be most helpful is with invaders. Since they come into your game randomly and not via summon sign, it would be cool if there's some kind of visual indication that they're from your group as well. So that's about it for now. I did a bunch of other random testing in the network test, mostly on a lot of little side mechanics, so I might make a second video on that if you're interested. My main project I have going on right now is part 2 of my Demon Souls compare through, which I've been working hard on, and feel kind of bad that it's been sidelined a couple of times. It's not just a side-by-side comparison of the Demon Souls original and remake, but I'm digging up all sorts of obscure stuff to look at along the way, and I can promise to even diehard fans that I cover some stuff that you haven't seen before. I'll link to part 1 in the description below, and I hope you're looking forward to part 2 sometime in the coming weeks. If you'd like to support this channel, I recommend doing all of the things, but I'll also link to my Patreon below. Thanks for watching.